experiences I went through. Everything about it.
A very good welcome this evening to the Fall 2012 Meet the Author series at Hutchins Library. We are excited to have Shari Hadley, an SBU alum, speak to us tonight about her book, From the Cauldron to the Cross. One of her professors while at SBU, Dr. Richard Brewer, will introduce her in just a few minutes. I believe she has a few friends and family that she might want to introduce later as well. After Shari speaks, there will be a time to ask questions. And Carol Shoemaker is here from the SBU bookstore to give you an opportunity to buy her books if you would like. And then also Shari will be here to autograph them if you would like that. And students, remember, if you haven't already signed up for chapel credit, do that at the back before you leave. The Meet the Author series was created to recognize and promote literature, reading, the art of writing, and those who write. By providing opportunities for the university community and the local community to participate in art and humanities programming, the Author Series supports the university and university library's mission, goals, and value statements. Since 2005, we have featured authors of history, psychology, theology, poetry, biography, and autobiography. We have even had an author of a mystery novel. There are several people I would like to recognize tonight for their work in making this event possible. The SBU Clarinet Quartet for playing so well during our fellowship time, the Fresh Ideas catering staff for the refreshments, Carol Shoemaker from the SBU bookstore for making the books available for sale, and the University Library student assistants for helping us set up, serve refreshments, and pass out programs. And finally, the Author Series Committee. Linda Davis, Maggie Clutie, Susan Cromrie, Bethany Messersmith, Colleen Rose, and Joshua Welker. Without their help, this event would not have been possible. Thank you, all of you, very much. And now I would like to call on Dr. Ed Walton to lead us in prayer.
Before I pray, I would like to just echo your sentiment of having you here, and Shari, just looking forward to this presentation. And as I pray, I will be praying for the words that you speak to be blessed by him. So let's pray together. Father, we thank you for the opportunity to come together tonight and just to enjoy your creation and how it is expressed through Shari and all that you have taken her through in her life. Father, we pray for our time together that it would be blessed and anointed by you, that you would enable Shari to say the things that are important to her in ways that are important to her to say. Father, that everything that she says honors and glorifies you. We love you. We thank you for the time to be here. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Well, I have the honor and privilege of introducing Shari Willis Setzer Hadley. A number of names. Shari joined us in the fall of 2003. I get to know her shortly thereafter in the spring of 2004 when she took some of my classes. We began a relationship there as faculty member to student. We went from there to friends to colleagues. She now is a professional in the field. When she came to SBU in the fall of 2003, it followed on the heels of a significant tragedy. She was thrust into a brand new environment, from the faith of Wicca to a place where Christianese was flowing so readily that it was puzzling in many ways to her. She has illustrated an incredible example of redemption. She came to know Christ as a consequence of an intervention that I'm sure she will tell you about. Hers has been a miraculous transformation, and like most miracles, it was not instantaneous. It was a process, still is a process, and as she talks, I think you will gain a flavor of how she has had God work in her life and how it led to the publishment of this book, and look forward to hearing her as well. And Shari, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Dr. Brewer. That's quite an introduction. I'm going to have to remember that the next time all my students fall asleep in class. Help me boost my self-esteem. But yes, thank you everyone for coming. My name is Shari Hadley. Willis was my maiden name. I've not been married 4 times. And I'm here to talk about my book. But my book is really just my autobiography. It's an autobiography, but it's really just my testimony. So I'm not going to just sit here and go verbatim through the book, but this is what it looks like. We have several back there. The bookstore also carries them, and then I have them myself. And I actually have another book signing this weekend at Bolivar High School for the PCCS craft fair. But I'll just get started, and I made a few notes because if I don't, I go off on a bunny trail, and then it's you know, fruitless after that. But as a child, in the book I start out as a child, and I spent a lot of time in the woods, and not all of what I tell you tonight is in the book. It's actually, you're getting a few freebies. Did I hit something? Oh, okay. I spent a lot of time in the woods because it was really scary in the house. We lived out in the country, and I knew it was safer outside than it was inside. My mother suffered from, I think, multiple mental illness issues. I know she was undiagnosed bipolar, which at the time we called it manic depressive. And she exhibited this through racing thoughts, violent, aggressive behavior. She was very unpredictable. Her manic stages, she would buy things, you know, like, oh, gee, we need a head of cattle. So then she'd buy a bunch of cows, or, gee, we need a motorcycle, or we need a camper. You know, it was ridiculous things. And then her more depressive stage, that would get really frightening because she would get angry first and then find something to get angry about. But she also had multiple other issues. She was suicidal. I talk about in the book one of her suicide attempts. She had an eating disorder. I remember I remember the sound of her making herself vomit so that she would be thin. Which at one point she wanted to be thin for her new boyfriend, and yes, she was still married to my father at the time. So she had multiple issues going on, and she wouldn't seek help. She did spend time in a psych ward after a suicide attempt, but she still didn't seek help after that. And along with the mental illnesses, she had a lot of paranoia, and there was a mixture. She would mix, you know, I was told she was a Christian, but I really didn't see it. She would mix her paranoia with her religious beliefs. And so, I mean, I'm kind of dating myself, but if some of you think back, there was a book called 88 Reasons Why the World's Going to End in 1988. She had that book, and that was like her Bible. I mean, she read through that book. I remember her setting us on the bed and showing us things in the book about, you know, Procter & Gamble, and it has the crescent moon and the 13 stars, and we had to get rid of all the Procter & Gamble products in our house, and you know, how the all-seeing eye was on all of the dollar bills, and the government was out to get us, and Jesus Christ was coming again, and she became obsessed with the number 666, and it just all kinds of very irrational fears associated with her Christian beliefs. And then later she became interested in the New Age movement, so she would blend, you know, zodiac signs and ESP, and she believed she saw a UFO once, and would talk about that. So it was just a very strange, she was a very frightening woman to me, honestly. I was scared of her. I spent most of my childhood hiding from her. My father was agnostic. He didn't believe in God. He believed in science, medicine. He put his faith in, you know, evolution, and he didn't see humans as having a reason to be here. He said, there's no reason for us to be here. It's all an accident, and there's no value to human life. And he demonstrated that to me. Without going into details, he would find ways to be alone with me that way. My mother worked nights, and he would find ways to be alone. I'll just put it that way. So growing up in this home, there was suicidal, and there was molestation, and there was abuse, and I give some examples of that, and I don't discuss about all of it, because at some point, I talked to my brother about it, he said at some point it's just a list of terrible things that happen, and it's really pointless. But I became suicidal myself when I was a child. I didn't see any other way out, and in our family, suicide is a long and honorable tradition. I have my uncle shot himself in the head. I have another one that shot himself in the gut. I had a cousin who overdosed on prescription medication and alcohol. I have an uncle who slit his wrists. I had another cousin who, if any of you are familiar with the police department, sometimes people, they don't want to kill themselves, but they want to get the police to do it. So he antagonized some police enough and pulled a gun that they shot him, but they only wounded him, and then they sent him to prison. So, but anyways, I saw suicide a lot in my family, and suicidal ideation. Excuse me, I'm getting over a terrible cold. But so I would think about it myself, only I never really had the courage to go through with it. I would sit and think, I'd sit and look at the razor blade, and I think, if only I could do it, if only I could get away with it. But honestly, part of it was I was afraid that if I didn't succeed, I would be in more trouble than I was now. So I never went through with it. And the life was just horrible. But then one day, something wonderful happened. I was 11 years old, and I got off the school bus, and we always stopped at my grandmother's. And I got off the school bus, and my father came in and told us that my mother was dead. I didn't know what had happened. Nobody told us what happened. She wasn't ill, so I knew something had caused her to die suddenly. But I didn't know what. He just said, "I'm sorry to tell you, your mother's dead. She's gone." This was on a Thursday. I missed school Friday. We had visitation Saturday, the funeral Sunday, and I was back to school Monday like nothing ever happened, and we never spoke of it again. I eventually found out what happened when I found a newspaper clipping. I would periodically dig through my father's things, because I think kids do that. But I would dig through his things, because I was nosy. And I found a newspaper clipping, and what had happened, she'd been killed in a farming accident. My parents were divorced. They just finalized their divorce 4 months earlier. She got the farm, and she was having the yard, some maintenance done in the yard, and she was having the trees trimmed. And these really tall pecan trees. And she had my uncle, her younger brother, come over. And he was standing at the top of the ladder with a chainsaw, cutting the limbs. And she was at the base of the ladder, holding onto it to steady it. Well, he cut a limb, it bounced back, knocked him off the ladder, and he fell, and she caught the live chainsaw on her chest. And it cut through the left side and into her chest. And he grabbed her, carried her up the hill, drove her to El Dorado, because we lived in Taperville at the time. El Dorado Springs was the closest hospital, but she was dead on arrival. And I work for CMH, and sometimes I go and speak and meet with some of the doctors in El Dorado, and there are people there that still remember. And this happened in 1984. So there are people there that still remember this. So suddenly, she's gone. This very frightening presence in my life is gone. And I'm happy about it. But everyone else around me is upset. And so then I developed this guilt. Like, how can I be happy that my mother's dead? This is horrible. And it took a long time. I was in my 20s, but I finally I found someone to talk to, and I'll never forget, he told me, he said, Shari, you acted normally in an abnormal situation, and there's nothing wrong with being glad that someone is gone who used to hurt you. Because she was a scary person. She was really scary. Between my two parents, I mean, between my molesting father and my mentally ill mother, I would have chosen to be with my father rather than her. That's how scary she was. But after my mother's death, I had a lot of questions about, where is she? Is she in heaven? Is she in hell? I couldn't picture her in heaven, honestly. Is she somewhere in between, like limbo or purgatory, or is she haunting the property because we lived on 200 acres and she was killed there in this violent death? I'm 11 years old. I don't know what to believe about the afterlife because my father doesn't have any belief system whatsoever. So I have a children's Bible and I try to read it, and I do read it from beginning to end, but honestly I don't understand 90% of it because I don't have anyone to talk to. And so then I pick up the next best thing, and that's my mother's books on the New Age movement. And then I understood those. Those were easy to understand. I remember Linda Goodman's sun signs. Those are zodiac signs, yeah. So you're out of your head. But, and I had friends who were interested in the New Age movement. We started playing with Ouija boards, getting involved in a lot of stuff. And as I grew into a teenager. I hated myself, I had low self-esteem, I thought I was a piece of garbage. I started experimenting with drugs and alcohol. I'll admit I liked the drugs better than the alcohol, which didn't help. I had relationships with men that I really should not have been having. And I just really was very self-destructed and didn't care if I lived or died. I still had that suicidal feeling about me. And then I met this wonderful guy, and I couldn't believe it. His name was Randy, and he was tall and black hair and blue eyes and funny and worked hard, and I was very careful to see how he treated his family, and he loved his mother and loved his sisters and his nieces and nephews, and it took him a long time to get me to believe it, that I was worth him loving me. I was worthy of his love, of his respect. But he finally did it. I mean, it took months, and then maybe, I would say 2 years probably, before I fully believed that he really did love me. And that was just, it was amazing for me. We got married and moved to Springfield, and I started attending college. And though we were happily married, I still wondered spiritually about what's out there. What is this? I've heard it called the God-sized shaped hole in your heart that you're trying to find a way to fill. And so I was fascinated with religion still always interested in the New Age movement. I did have like a tiny bit of understanding of Christianity because one of my grandmothers used to take me to church when I was little, but I can't say I felt welcome there. The other church children were not friendly, and it was a tiny country church. And then my grandmother developed Alzheimer's, so we didn't go anymore. So I did have a very tiny understanding of Christianity, but not much. So when I started taking religious studies classes, I took one about new religions in America, and these guest speakers came, and they just came and talked about the religion. They weren't proselytizing. They weren't trying to gain members or anything. But they talked about a god and a goddess and a balance of power in the universe and how they create life and reincarnation and spirit guides and just and how they worship nature, how they don't believe in Satan, they don't believe in the existence of sin, that anything evil in the world is brought about through human nature, and there's kind of this peace and love, and everyone just should get along, And I was just mesmerized. I absolutely loved everything they had to say, and I felt like this is where I belong, because this is something I've been studying for years. And it turned out that they were Wiccans. And I sought them out afterwards, and there used to be several spots in Springfield where they used to hang out. And I learned more and more and more, and finally, probably it was less than a year later, I fully dedicated myself to the goddess. And in the book, I don't detail what I did in Wicca because it's a Christian publisher, and they didn't like that. So I could tell you some here. I followed the Gardnerian tradition. A tradition is kind of like a denomination that Christians would think of as a denomination, because there's lots of different traditions in Wicca. I followed the teachings of Gerald Gardner as written by his greatest initiate, Raymond Buckland. And I recently looked him up online, and I was surprised to learn that his book is still a bestseller, Raymond Buckland's. I also looked up Scott Cunningham, which was another author that I loved. His books are still bestsellers. And Silver Ravenwolf. I had one of her books. I kind of got to where I didn't respect her teachings after a while, but I liked one of her books. But just between Scott Cunningham's best-selling book, I mean, and they've written multiple ones, which it surprised me because Scott Cunningham died at a relatively young age in 1993 after a long battle with AIDS, and his book is still a bestseller. It sold 600,000 copies. Raymond Buckland's bestseller sold 400,000 copies, so together that's just 1 million books, and that's only 2 books in print. So if you think Wicca is not popular, you're kidding yourself. It's everywhere. And I had multiple books on witchcraft, and all of the accoutrements of Wicca. As I mentioned, I'd done a Ouija board when I was younger. I had a bad experience. I didn't go back to that. But I had my altar with my libation dishes. I had my symbols of the god and goddess. I worshiped the horned god and the triple goddess, as represented by the sun and the moon and the moon's phases. I also offered incense. I have it written down. Oh yeah, I cast spells. I had my own book of shadows, my own mirror book. I had tarot cards, but I have to say I was really bad at tarot cards. There's kind of a funny story about that in the book. I also had crystals. I loved crystals. I studied runes. I would draw down the moon, and I would raise the cone of power, and I would cast the sacred circle, being careful to go Jaceel, not Widdershins, which I know it probably doesn't mean anything to you, but now you know what I had to put up with when I became a Christian, and I didn't understand where half of the stuff that you people were saying to me. But I did all this, and I did it for many, many years, 9 years, almost 10. I was a Wiccan. I did everything but join a coven. The thing about becoming a Wiccan was, one of the big things for me was that I didn't trust organized religion, and I just saw covens as just a smaller form of organized religion. And I really didn't want any part of that. I was a solitary practitioner or a lone witch. There's a lot of solitary practitioners out there. There are covens in Springfield. They're physical. Back then, most of the covens were physical, but online covens were just coming into being, and there's a lot of online ones now too. But yeah, I was a solitary practitioner, meaning I did all of my spell work alone. Sometimes, during the holidays, during the SBOTs or the Sabbats, different points of the wheel of the year, I would involve my husband and my son, especially during Yule or Samhain, but most of the time I didn't. I did it alone. And I also summoned spirits. I wasn't good at it at first, but over the years I became good at it, and that later caused me a lot of problems. But I did this for 9 years, and then that kind of all changed. One night I made dinner. I remember it was a few months after 9/11, and President Bush was getting ready to come on and give a speech. And I knew he was going to give it at 8 o'clock, but my husband wasn't home from work yet. He should have been home at 4. So it's 4 o'clock, and then it's 5 o'clock. I don't know where he's at. It's 6 o'clock. I'm angry. Okay, where is he? I've been married 10 years. You know, he's never not been home for dinner, trust me. He's never not just called or something. You know, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. I know something's serious now. He would not be gone for 4 hours. And I knew I would either get a phone call telling me where he was at, or someone would come to the door and tell me. And they came to the door. I was pacing in my kitchen looking out the window, and when I saw the Missouri Highway State Patrol cruiser, and it was shining a spotlight on all the mailboxes at the end of my cul-de-sac, and I remember just standing there thinking, just keep going, just keep going, we're not gonna stop here, just keep going, just keep, but it didn't. It stopped, and it pulled down my driveway, and there were no sirens. It was not in a hurry, and I thought, that's not good. And so I go outside to meet it, because we had a little boy, wonderful little guy. He was 5 at the time. He actually turned 6 that Saturday. But I meet these 2 men outside, and one is the Highway State Patrolman, and the other one is a chaplain. And as soon as they introduced the chaplain, I knew it was over. And the Highway State Patrolman said, "I'm sorry to inform you, but your husband's been killed in a car accident this evening." So my world just fell apart, because Randy was everything to me. He was my best friend. He was my soulmate. We were going to grow old together. He was the husband, the father of my child. He was the breadwinner of the family. He was the only person to ever love and accept me for who I was, and now he was gone. And not the least of which of my worries was, there's a Christian standing in my house, and I'm a witch. And I'm like, oh, you know, as if things couldn't get any worse. And you got to understand, I had an innate fear of Christians. You know, being a Wiccan for 9 years, invariably you're going to run into some nasty things. Christians aren't known for showing a lot of love for witches. And so I feared them, I hated them, I detested them. I didn't want them in my house. And in fact, I didn't even see them as a person, I just saw them as a thing. Something that I needed to just get out as soon as possible, but then, you know, then my mind would fall back to other things. My husband is dead, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna tell my son? And I realized I'm gonna have to start making phone calls soon, because I need to get someone there so they can leave, because they had another death notification that evening. And I needed to start calling family, because the 9 o'clock news was gonna be on, and I knew the accident would be on the news, and it was. The accident was on the news, along with images of my husband's bloody truck. And I didn't know what happened at first. I later found out, when I requested a file from the Highway State Patrol, that 2 men had borrowed an SUV. They didn't have a license, they didn't have insurance, they were speeding. They went around a curve, overcorrected, rolled the SUV into oncoming traffic, which just happened to be my husband, and he was crushed to death in the cab of his pickup truck earlier that day. All 3 men died instantly. So I'm thinking in my mind also, I mean, there's 100 things going through my head, but I'm also thinking, where's my goddess? I've worshipped you for 9 years. Where are you in my time of need? This is, if ever I needed something, someone, I needed you now. I need you now. And I had felt presences before, but I wasn't feeling anything now. And this is when I needed it most. And I was also falling back on a lot of my postmodern beliefs and a lot of the rules that I'd lived by as a Wiccan. such as the Wiccan Reed, which states, "And it harm none, do what thou wilt," which basically means you can do what you wish as long as you don't hurt anyone. And I'm thinking, well, that's all well and good as long as I follow it, but what happens when other people don't? Well, my husband gets killed, that's what happens. So that didn't exactly work out for me. Another belief was thou art God. If you work hard enough and you reincarnate enough, you can become part of the Godhead. But if you work hard enough at it right now, you can actually create your own reality. And because, you know, I was the creator of my own destiny. I had all this power. And I'm like, really? You can recreate reality, Shari? Recreate this reality. Bring your husband back. So that wasn't working. Thou art God. Well, okay, create something. Create a pebble in your hand. Well, that's not going to work. Okay, let's try something smaller. How about a grain of sand? No, not that. How about a speck of dust? You can't even create that, so you're not exactly a god, are you? So I was going through all of these. Also, the law of threefold return, which states anything you do will come back to you 3 times. It's kind of like the law of karma. It keeps a Wiccan in check so that she does white magic, not black magic. And it states that any energy you put out that's good, you will have 3 good things happen to you, and any energy you put out that's bad, you will have 3 bad things happen to you. And I'm thinking, what did I do that was so bad that it killed my husband? And I realized nothing. I didn't do anything this bad. I didn't do anything. So that law apparently isn't working either. So it's all falling apart. My faith is falling apart. My husband's dead. I've got a Christian standing in my house, and I've got to somehow figure out how to tell my 5-year-old son that his daddy's dead. So I go over to the couch and I sit down and I look up at this thing, and I said, I don't know what to say to him. And I didn't know what to say to him. And I also didn't know what to say to him in front of the Christian, because my belief system states that we all went to the summer land, which is kind of like heaven, but not exactly. But I'm sitting here, and you know, and I'm crying because I've just made several phone calls, and it was horrible, you know, having to tell my sister-in-laws that their brother was dead. You know, I mean, calling a funeral home. I mean, well, I guess I didn't call a funeral home. Ohio State Patrol did that, but I had to make all these all these calls. But I'm sitting there next to my son, and I don't know what to do. And I look up at it, and I tell him, and he says, "Would you like me to do this for you?" And my heart just started to melt. And I realized that this man, he was finally becoming human to me, is here to help me. He's not here to judge me, to condemn me, you know. He's here to help. And I told him no, I would do it. And I explained I just told my son, you know, that his daddy was in an accident and he wasn't coming home. Which he was only 5, so he didn't really understand it. I had to kind of go back and revisit that later, but eventually friends came, family came, the Christian left, the Ohio State Patrolman left. Before he left, the Christian left his business card, which was good because I couldn't remember anything about it. I was just still in shock. So then after that, my life became a whirlwind of funeral planning. You know, Randy was 40. We didn't have funeral planning. I mean, he had life insurance, thank God. But we didn't have a funeral plan done. So it was, you know, life became collecting the items from his body, beginning the lawsuit. That was a nightmare. It took 14 months. What to do with his belongings, you know, life insurance policies, Social Security. I had to go to probate court. I had to deal with his father, who was an alcoholic. There was just all kinds of issues that cropped up. And finally, you know, after all this whirlwind of people visiting and people offering to help, everyone just went home, because that's what they do. Someone dies, they say, "Call me if you need me," and then they go home and start living their little life all by themselves. And so I was there in my home with my grieving 5-year-old little boy. and I had $77 in the bank. And that was my life. My husband was dead. So I didn't know what to do with myself. I also had completely given up on my Wiccan faith at this point because it had not served me in my time of need, which I was angry about, I was hurt about. I remember looking at my altar and feeling like I needed to just vomit. I grabbed everything and threw it. It was on my dresser, and I just opened up the dresser drawer and raked everything in and slammed the door shut. And I'd had it. I really had it. But to say that I was seeking a new faith just yet, wouldn't be true. I wasn't. I was just grieving. I was in like this black abyss of grief. And I was like that for several weeks until it finally just got so horrible I didn't know what else to do. And I sought out the chaplains because I needed someone to talk to. And I was so desperate I didn't even talk to a Christian of all things. And he was the worst kind, you know. As I looked on his card, I discovered, you know, he had the equivalent of a high priest in my faith. And I'm like, ah, geez, really? But I sought him out, and when I first met him again, he was happy to see me, and he said he had been praying for me, which I'm like, whoa, really? And that he thought about me, and he tried to call, but I'd had my phone number changed since then. And so, you know, he was just very open. I still didn't trust him, and I didn't trust the situation because I knew of Wiccans who had walked into churches looking for help and who had been told, I think you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. Just, once you go try the church down the street, you really wouldn't be comfortable. You really can't. And I was waiting for that to happen. I was waiting for it to be thrown out of my ear. You know, you're not good enough, you know, things like that. Because I've known, you know, whenever a Christian does something to a Wiccan, they don't just do it to that Wiccan, they do it to that Wiccan and all of their friends. And now all of their Facebook friends, and it goes on Twitter, and it goes on everything. And I knew Wiccans who had had their tires slashed in the name of Christ, their cars keyed, they had their children, you know, harassed on the playground by other Christian children. They lost their jobs. I mean, you name it, it happened. And I remember vividly a little old lady grabbing me by the arm once in Shoney's and waving chick tracts in my face, telling me my son was going to burn in hell. So, you know, me walking into a church took a lot of courage. But honestly, at that point, I can't say it was courage as much as it was pain. So I walked in, and he was actually friendly, but I kept thinking, this isn't going to last. But I kept going back. One was the free food on Wednesday nights, I have to admit. But also just, you know, I kept going back because I thought, wow. I kept seeing things at this church, and I became envious, honestly. I would see Christians there, or actually saw one on TV that influenced me a lot. I had no idea who she was. Turned out her name was Beth Moore. But I just remember thinking, wow, I want what she's got. Look how much she loves her God, how much she has, look at the strength of her faith. I mean, look at that. I want that. I want that. Give me that. I want that. And I didn't know where else to go with this church. And this chaplain happened to be pastor, First Baptist Church, Marshfield, Missouri. He's here this evening. I'll introduce you here in a little bit. And I kept going back, and after 6 to 8 weeks, I finally trusted him enough to tell him, you know, I need to be saved. And he's like, what do you mean you're not? I'm like, oh no, I am so not saved. But so he's excited. He's like, wow, you know, let's talk about this. And I'm like, no, whoa, wait a minute. You need to know a few things about me. And I'm still thinking in the back of my head, any second he's going to throw me out. So then I start telling him that I'm Wiccan. And he's like, what is that? He didn't even know what it was, which was a real letdown because I was really excited. It really burst my bubble. I thought, whoa, what? You don't even know what that is? So then I'm like kind of explaining it just really mildly. a very sanitized version. You know, I don't get into the sex magic or anything, but just a very sanitized version of it. And but by the end of my time there, I accepted Christ. I said the little prayer, and me, a witch, I accepted Christ right there in that office. And I knew I was saved, but like Dr. Brewer said, it was a journey. I woke up the next morning, and I remember thinking, I'm a Christian. Now what? You know, it was like I'd applied for a job, and hey, good news, you got it. But I show up my first day, and I don't know what my responsibilities are. I don't know what my duties are. I don't know what my tasks are. I know somehow this has changed and affected every aspect of my life, but I don't know how. How does becoming a Christian affect how I've parented my child for 6 years as a pagan? How does becoming a Christian affect my relationship with my agnostic father, my atheistic homosexual brother, my in-laws who were Christians but who'd been terribly hurt by their church after my husband had been killed? How does it affect my worldview? How does it affect my political view? How does it affect my finances? How does it affect how I talk? How does it affect how I dress? I don't have a flipping clue. So where do I go? I go right back to my pastor's office. And I become an incredible nuisance, I'm sure. But I am there constantly. I'm going to church I go to Sunday school, Sunday morning. I'm there for, Sunday afternoon service. And then I'm there on Wednesday nights for the food. And then I'm back again at some point during the week in his office going, okay, you really got to explain this to me. You mean there's no such thing as reincarnation? I really don't get this. You've got to be kidding me. He's like, no, there really isn't any such thing. Man has once, is destined to live once, and then it's all over. I'm like, no, it can't be over. I've like totally screwed up this life. I get another try, right? And he's like, no, you don't get another try, Shari. So I'm constantly going back because I've got, I'm just so confused. Nobody else in Sunday schools is talking about their spirit guides. I don't know what's going on, and then they dunk me in cold water. And I'm thinking it's some sort of, Christian water ritual, but it's called baptism, but I don't know. I thought some cruel joke on the witch is all I'm thinking. Just dunk me in cold water. And then, it floats. You guys, if you're Monty Python fans, you get that. If it floats, it's a witch. And then I go forward and I sign the little membership card, and I'm thinking, cool, I got a membership to the gym now. I don't know what that means. I'm a member. I don't know what this means, but okay. Everybody's really happy, so okay. But I'm constantly struggling, trying to figure out my place in this new thing called Christianity, because I was 30 years old. Came to Christ as a 30-year-old widow with a 6-year-old little boy who hadn't been in church much, trust me. And I remember at one point, I don't want to take up the whole night, but at one point he asked me, Mom, what about the monkeys? And I said, what about monkeys? They're still monkeys. And he's like, no, but you said we come from monkeys. Yeah, about that, honey. There's these two people called Adam and Eve, and because I had raised him to believe in evolution. So he's coming to me with questions. I'm like, oh my gosh. So it was quite a transformation for both of us. And 8 months after my husband was killed, 7 months after I became a Christian, I made a huge life change. I put our property up for sale. I moved from Marshfield, Niangua area, to Bolivar, bought a house, and enrolled in college here at SBU. I hadn't completed my college degree the first time around, and I knew I needed to get my degree in order to take care of my son and I, because I swore in my husband's grave. I told him, I don't care what it takes, I will take care of our child. I promise you, I will take care of him no matter what. And I knew that meant going back to college. So I came here, and I was here from 2003 to 2005. Got my degree in psychology, and then I later went on to get my master's in social work, and I'm now a licensed therapist with the state of Missouri. I had my LCSW, and I work for CMH Hospice as a grief counselor and social worker. And I also teach at Bolivar Technical College. I teach psychology classes, and I do lots of other little things like public speaking. But as I was here at SBU, I learned why I was having so much trouble with Christianity, and part of that was the whole Christianese. Wow, Christianese, that's what they're doing. Christians use words I'd never heard of. They use phrases I'd never heard of. I mean, I didn't know the meaning of sin. I didn't know the meaning of redemption, grace, testimony, apologetics. I went to a pastor, and there was another pastor at our church, and he said, you need to learn about apologetics. And I said, Curtis, I said, in my head that means it's the study of the god Apollo, but I'm betting that's not right. And he's like, no, that's not right, Shari. So I started learning about apologetics. And then also the phrases. I remember in Sunday school, one lady said, yeah, I talked to the waitress and I planted a seed. What? Those two things don't jive. You know, she talked to a waitress and then she went gardening. I did not understand what that was about. And then there's all the rituals of, you know, there was Advent, and then I got to tell you, I just drew a blank. I used to call it the whole bread and grape juice thing, the cracker grape juice thing. You know, the Lord's Supper. Lord's Supper, that's it. That's very strange for a pagan, a Wiccan. You know, the whole Christians think I'm weird, but they're the ones that eat their own God. It's very disturbing. It really is disturbing. It's a disturbing ceremony. But, so the phrases, the rituals, and just the culture. I mean, coming here to SBU, completely different culture. I remember in chapel, I don't have this in the book. I have a different chapel story than that, but I was in chapel because it's required. But I was in chapel, and there was a guest speaker, of course, and the lights dim, and he draws our attention to the screen behind us. And I don't know if I've ever told this story, but he draws our attention to the screen behind us. And I'm looking at this screen, and you got to understand, I'd been a Wiccan most of my life. I grew up listening to AC/DC and Alice Cooper and Ozzy Osbourne, and I'm looking up here, and there's this clip playing, and I do not have any idea what's going on. There's this cucumber. There's a tomato. And they're singing about a hairbrush. And what's even stranger is that everyone around me is singing along. And I'm not kidding, this really happened. And I'm looking to my left and I'm looking to my right. Everybody knows the words but me. I have no idea what this is. I'm trying to figure out how this relates to scripture. And this was one of those many times I went straight home and I'm emailing my pastor. I'm like, okay, explain to me the singing fruit thing. And he's like, okay, Shari, yeah, that's VeggieTales. You know, and then he says, he's a cucumber, not a pickle. So, I mean, this whole culture, this complete culture shift of coming here. But it was good for me. As hard as it was good for me. And becoming a new Christian, I was, of course, excited. I wanted to share my faith. I was very on fire. I mean, I didn't really have a clue what I was doing, but I was really on fire, and I wanted to bring everyone with me. Because as confused as I was by the Christian culture and Christians themselves and church, I knew that God loved me, and that was the primary thing. And I knew that I was finally on the right path, because this felt so right. What I'd been doing was not right. And I wanted to grab everyone that I knew who had been doing that also and bring them with me. I just wanted to shake them, like, no, this is where we need, this is the direction we need to go. And one of those people I wanted to bring to Christ was my father. He was still agnostic. He really enjoyed punching holes in Christians' faith. He really had no respect for Christians. He said, yeah, they're nice people, and the world's better off with them, I guess, but I am not going to be duped into believing that mythology. theology. That's a bunch of garbage. He says, oh yeah, sure, it'd be nice to believe that you go somewhere when you die. Wouldn't that be nice? You know, he was very sarcastic. And I tried talking to him, a pastor, a chaplain in our hospice tried talking to him when he was in the hospital at one point. Other people tried talking to him. I gave him literature to read. I remember getting a copy of the book Case for Christ here at SBU. I'd never heard of that book before. It was fabulous. So I gave it to Dad. He got 4 chapters in it and told me to come get it or he was going to throw it away. So I really tried. And I'd also come to the point in my life where I was able to forgive him of the things that he'd done, that he'd hurt me. I was not able to do that as a Wiccan. In fact, one of the reasons I balked at becoming a Christian was because I knew I'd have to forgive all the people who hurt me. And I really was not the slightest bit interested in that. Not the slightest bit interested. And something that, one thing that really helped me a lot after becoming a Christian was going through the steps to freedom in Christ. And one of those steps is the forgiveness step. And for me, the longest step was renouncing all of my involvement in the occult. That took 3 hours. But the forgiveness step was the hardest one, to be able to go through step by step, one by one, and forgive everyone who had hurt me. And that included the men who had killed my husband, the father who had molested me, and the mother who was so mentally ill that she terrified me. But I was able to do it. It was a process. I'll be the first to admit it wasn't instantaneous, and there were times he would get on my nerves and I would have to remind myself, you've forgiven him, Shari.